Tonight, we are so very lucky to have such an incredible speaker here. Edna is an incredible person, and the more I get to know her, the more I'm amazed by her. She has had a long and wonderful career. She's a retired Army colonel and is a true example of social entrepreneur and change maker. Her career path can be described in 3 words: service, leadership, and change. Colonel Cummings is the first African-American woman to receive a commission as an Army officer from the Appalachian State University in her home state of North Carolina. Afterwards, she served in key positions in the U.S. Army, held leadership positions in multi-million-dollar businesses, worked on national initiatives, and was able to bring recognition to an all-black World War II Women's Army unit called the 688. She has championed the legislative efforts to enact passage of the 688 Congressional Gold Medal Act of 2021, signed by the President in March of 2022 and received just recently. This is the nation's highest civilian honor. Cummings has been recognized as a national leader by bipartisan elected officials and diverse social and business organizations. And recently, and I mean just last weekend, she was awarded an honor by the Daughters of the American Revolution, a Medal of Honor by them. So without further ado,
Peggy, thank you, and it's such an honor to be with you and to see so many members of the Daughters of the American Revolution. I was just with you all last weekend. So the 688, yes, it is history, but the more I learned about the 688, the more I felt a connection. It's more than history to me. You know, it's my heritage. On the left is a picture of the commander of the 688, Charity Edna Adams. Her married name is Early. So we share the first name, and something about military photographers. 4 decades apart, we are all posed the same way. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I'm Army. I was always taught to give it a purpose. I don't read the slides. But just to give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about and the agenda. Basically, I want to give you an overview of the 688, my advocacy, and that's the foundation for my book. But more importantly, the 688's contributions to World War II and some of their profiles and recognitions and the impact. Because you can have history, and history is great, but we look at the impacts of history. How does it change lives, or how does it change history? And I believe the 688 has done that. A cute kid, adorable, about 5 years old. So how did that innocent, wonderful little girl join the Army and then on April 29th address Congress?
Wow.
So that's the title of my book, basically, from Army Brat. And I was an Army brat. Some people say I've been a brat all my life. To 688 champion. How many veterans do we have here? Great. So you all understand this slide. Yes. I lived at Fort Gordon where my dad was in. Then we lived at Fort Bragg. He went to Vietnam. We got kicked off to military installation because then family members, when the men deployed, we had to leave. But when I joined, my first assignment was Fort Lee, was changed to Fort Greg Adams, and I was back at Fort Lee, Fort Rucker, and my last assignment was at Peterson. Now, this does not include the short-term assignments, less than 4 weeks at different schools, so that's a history right there. So, okay, I can figure out these slides here. All right. Maintaining military connection through mail. I saw the mail boat on Main Street I was fascinated about that. I took a picture of it. And I'm just like, yeah, mail is still important. And people think because we have social media now, the impact of mail has been minimized, but it has not. And this is my dad when he was serving, probably in the early 60s, and he went to Vietnam twice. The first time was with the advisory force, and he was severely wounded. And then the second time was in 69, first time 62, second time. And I still have those letters. And that maintained our connection while he was deployed. In my book, chapter 4, this is my late husband. He was stationed on the DMZ in Korea. And the top is a postcard where the Americans and the Allied companies, the side of the Americans, would meet with the North Koreans. And that's a postcard. On the bottom is, that's my late husband in the middle talking about the armistice. And I served in Korea as well, so that was part of my journey. You know, land of the morning calm. And I learned so much about the military and why our service is so important by literally seeing the adversary on a routine basis. Again, opposed military people the same way. That's Charity Adams. This is not the 6888, but before she served with the 6888, she was at Fort Des Moines, Iowa. And that's me when I was in Korea. Different era, 40 plus years apart, but similar challenges. Being a woman of color, and just in an environment post-war. When I joined, it was just post-Vietnam. The nation was still coming to terms with post-Vietnam, and it wasn't very friendly on college campuses. So some of you may remember that I was in ROTC, and professors would question, why would I serve? Forget about me being a woman or a black woman. Just why are you in this uniform? But freedom isn't free for those of you who have served, and those of you who haven't. We understand the price of freedom. Our journey to get recognition for the 6888 involves storytelling. And Peggy, you're spot on. We have to capture these stories. So the 6888 story started for me by raising funds for a monument. The monument is at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Fort Leavenworth, Kansas is the home of the 10th Cavalry Buffalo Soldiers. And there are actually Buffalo soldiers buried there at Fort Leavenworth. And so in the 90s, there was a Buffalo Soldier statue built, and that's the flagship monument. And other firsts were built around that. We have Buffalo, the Triple Nickel, General Powell. So the project manager said we needed a monument. And so that's the monument that has all the known names at the time of the 6888 women. Then we have the 6888 documentary that was released in 2019. So if you haven't seen that, all right, I'm talking about the 6888. Is everyone familiar with the story of the 6888? So I don't have to cover that. Basically, they restored reliable mail service in the European theater of operations during World War II. So for those of you who don't know the full story, I'll talk about that some more, but just to put it in context. So in 2019, right when we completed building the monument and dedicated the monument, I worked with a film producer, James Ferris, who produced a film about the Hello Girls. Hello Girls were World War I telephone operators who put the calls through for General Pershing. That's millions and millions of calls. When they returned to the U.S., the Army said they were never soldiers. They signed enlistment papers. They were AT&T operators and volunteered. But when the Army came back, the Army said they were not soldiers. Similar to the Women's Air Service pilots, they did not get recognized as veterans until 1977. So when we completed, while we were working on the documentaries, 6888 is now on Tubi and Prime, I learned how to use social media. Wasn't on social media, this was 2019. I had a 27-year-old cousin said, you need to get on social media, hashtag, and do all whatever you do on social media. And I got the trailer, and sure enough, you never know who's paying attention. The U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom reached out to me and says, "Hey, we want to talk to you. Follow us, DM us, so we can talk." So because of my 27-year-old cousin, I knew what to do. True story. And that's what I did. So basically, the U.S. ambassador, that's Robert W. Johnson, Robert Wood Johnson, who was the U.S. ambassador to the U.K. of the Johnson & Johnson family, hosted our documentary team to come to the UK for the 75th anniversary of World War II and dedicated a blue plaque where the women worked at the King Edward School in Birmingham. And that's all from a social media post. And that's the ambassador, the headmaster of the school, that's me, that's Jim Ferris. General Clara Adams Zender, she's the oldest living black female general, you know, General Clara, nurse. And Gary Stewart and Elizabeth Helm Fraser, who worked with me. The gentleman on the far right is a UK veteran. Senator Jerry Moran was my lead sponsor. He's from Kansas. He supported the 6888 monument. And so I drafted the legislation, and we were also working to get the 6888 their only performance award, the Meritorious Unit Commendation. They never received a performance award. They all received campaign medals, Women's Army Corps medals, and just your standard medals. So we were able to give them the Meritorious Unit Commendation. Blair Underwood heard about the story. His dad is a veteran, retired '06, and he's an Army brat, born overseas. So he's working on a Broadway-themed musical, Broadway-bound, is still in development. Of course, the Netflix movie. And then for a while, Fort Lee was renamed Fort Gregg Adams after Charity Adams. Now it's reverted back to Lee, but named after a Buffalo soldier. But that's the result of storytelling. We started in 2018, and the story grew, and you never know who's paying attention. So this is a photo of not the 6888. You see this photo? This is not the 6888. This is Charity Adams at Fort Des Moines, Iowa. So 6888 was formed from the Women's Army Corps, the Women's Army Air Forces, and the Army Service Force. Before Charity Adams became commander of the 6888, she was in command at Fort Des Moines. So this is a picture of Charity Adams in 1943. This is sometimes represented as the 6888. So before the 6888 went overseas, they had to go to basic training for about 6 weeks. Most of them went to Fort Des Moines. 855 women handpicked from the Women's Army Corps. There was about 6,520 black women on active duty at the time throughout World War II. And of that 6,855 formed the 6888. And this is an article I found from the Afro newspaper that showed that the recruiting effort. So that's Charity Adams. She had command time. Then she recruited for women to answer the nation's call. And one thing about Charity Adams, if you saw the movie, very accurate. She was brilliant, high school valedictorian, triple major, math, Latin, and physics. So she was in grad school at Ohio State getting her master's in vocational psychology when she joined the Army. All women, the 150,000 women who served during World War II, had to have a high school education. The men did not. I'm just stating history. That's right. They had to pass physical intelligence tests and be of good health and character. I'm not sure how they assess character. But what's interesting, in 1940, post-Depression, 64% of 24 to 34-year-olds didn't complete high school. And 20 million young men, 50% were rejected the first year because of literacy or health levels. Remember, right after the Depression, low literacy levels, and the health condition of most Americans, I mean, they were poor. And so for women, they wanted, the women to be better, and the women had to be better. And so with 6888, they were handpicked from over the 6,000 women who served. 85% were either ex-school teachers or holders of college degrees. Basic training, 6 weeks, then 2 weeks of pre-deployment training at Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. I was just at Fort Oglethorpe about 3 weeks ago, and it was also there in 2019. Fort Oglethorpe is very interesting. It's in Chattanooga, on the border of Tennessee and Georgia, and where the 6888 trained was a Civil War battlefield, World War I, the American Indian Wars, and some of the landmarks are still there, to include those for the 6888. So in the movie, it showed the 6888 going through basic training at Fort Oglethorpe. They went through overseas training at Fort Oglethorpe. Then they departed from Camp Shanks, New York. I thought this was just a cool picture. Yeah. All right. The ETO, if you saw the movie, you saw Kerry Washington talking about the mail. The 6888 had to manage the mail for all Americans, 7 million Americans, about 3 million troops passing through the ETO. And as you may or may not know, the Eastern Front was the deadliest. So this is where the mail was tracked. And in the movie, you saw her putting the different pins on the locations. That really happened because this is what they had to deal with, and just try to figure out with the fast troop movement how to get the mail to the troops. So I found this article also in the Afro newspaper. I don't know if you know about the Afro-American newspaper. It's one of the oldest black newspaper, family owned. The publisher was investigated by the FBI during World War II for part of the Double Victory campaign, African-American press, victory at home for equal rights and democracy, and victory abroad. And he had a daughter who was in the 6888, so he really made sure that the actions of the 6888 was covered. But I found this article a month before the 6888 arrived. The 255th Port Company, which was in one of the waves or Normandies of black unit, unloaded 3,600 tons of mail in France just a month before the 6888 arrived, and that's 130,000 bags. So in my book, that intrigued me. I did mail math. A letter weighs approximately 0.4 of a pound, like a fourth of a pound, 4 ounces. One bag has about 70 pounds. That's a lot of mail. Yeah. So they got accommodation just for offloading the mail in record time. There's 130,000 bags of mail. So what was going on with the mail? D-Day operations, the planning has started long before D-Day. And so sometimes the mail was stopped because of logistical reasons. Vehicles had to be used for, the war and not taking the mail, but mail also has sensitive information. I located a book written by these mail researchers in the UK, and they just talked about how intense the mail operation was. It was an allied postal network. And what's interesting, I learned that the 6888's force structure, 855 women, 31 officers, 824 enlisted, was based on an allied post office force structure because it was no accident the way the unit was configured, so it was just fascinating to me. But what was happening, you may have seen in the movie, where troops were complaining. 2 years without mail, families at home were complaining, so that vital communication was lost between the loved ones and the troops on the front line. And other units had tried since 1941, when the U.S. got involved in the war, to clear the mail backlog because the mail just started coming fast. Christmas packages, you name it, the mail was not getting through. So for the veterans out there, anyone besides Army, any Air Force? Okay, Marines, we'll take Marines. When you deploy and go overseas, the Army is the executive agent for your mail. The Army handles the mail for everyone overseas. It was true in World War II, and it's true now. So, just to let you know. So it was a military problem, not just an Army problem, it was a military problem. So the area around Birmingham, England, it's called Sutton Coldfield, was where the mail was being handled for the Allied Mail Post Office and the U.S. And there was just a shortage of qualified postal officers. So I put this in a star, this is a standard, kind of like an after-action report. I'm not going to read this, but just to give you an idea, 2 to 3 years of backlog mail in the European theater of operations. And so the basic task was just get the mail flowing. Troops haven't heard, the morale is low. Just think about that cup of coffee that we have every morning or whatever you drink or do to get you going. And if you don't have that, your day is kind of off. And so you haven't heard from your families in 2 years plus. Just think of what that does to the morale and the fighting spirit. You can have all the artillery and everything that you need, but if you don't have that vital connection, that was something that the military could not fix. So other units had tried and failed, but they could not get the mail sorted. So what the 6888 did, basically they restored reliable mail service, established 24/7 operations. And if you've worked shift work, you know a shift is never 8 hours. You have shift change at the beginning and you have shift change at the end. And they had locator cards. Locator cards are like the old change of address postcards you had to fill out, and we all remember how sometimes you fill those out and your mail still never came to you for about 6 or 7 months. So you multiply that by years, so they're about 3-inch locator cards. At peak periods, the 6888 processed about 65,000 pieces of mail and packages per shift, about 195,000 per 24 hours. That was just, the average, shift, the workload fluctuates. Then they went on to Rouen and Paris, France. And this is a newsletter I located, special delivery, and it was hailed as one of the best WAC units, Women Army Corps units, in the Army. So they solved the military's mail and morale problem. So what made storytelling interesting about the 6888? I've just given you the history, but more important, the history, the personal stories of the women. You heard me talk about Charity Adams, but there are 855 women, 855 stories. And one of those stories was made into the movie, one about Miss Lena King. But here's some of the other stories that I thought was really fascinating. This first one was a friend of my mother's. Went to the same church in Fayetteville, didn't know anything about her. And Mom said she went over to her house one day and saw this picture of this woman in uniform. And her friend said, oh yeah, that's me. And so when I started working the 6888, Mom said, see if Devetta's picture, Devetta's name is on the list. And I did, and sure enough. But I started digging. Miss Devetta was put in jail for a little while because she refused to flip mattress springs, bed springs. Because what was happening, segregation was still in the military. The women had freedom of movement once they went to England. The locals treated them great. They talk about that. But within the military and the women within the U.S., you have women being beaten, spat on, put in prison. There's one good book called Glory in Their Spirit by Sandra Bolzinius that talks about these women who were court-martialed at Fort Devens. So Miss Devetta was put in, confinement for a few days for refusing to flip bed springs, and she's buried on base at Fort Bragg. Miss Elizabeth Barker Johnson, I'm also from North Carolina, I'm partial North Carolinians. But the proximity, some of the families started digging, and I met Miss Johnson before she died, and she had graduated from Winston-Salem State University when she returned from the war. A lot of these women used GI Bill when they returned. Miss Shepherd did, and so did Miss Johnson. So she said she was unable to march across stage because she had gotten her job teaching, and the principal wouldn't release her from her work to go graduate. So 70 years later, we were able to give her the graduation she never had. So at 99 years old, she marched across stage in a walker, but she still did that.
Great.
And she also took courses at Appalachian State. She's a retired school teacher. Miss Hunt Martin's from Buffalo, New York. Fascinating story. She worked in the facility that housed the Manhattan Project. Yeah, she got a job, she says, cleaning restrooms, and she had to sign an NDA. I saw the NDA, and this was in Niagara Falls, and she said, well, no one ever came in there. They just told me to be there and to make sure that people came in and, left everything. And so we started digging, and sure enough, it was on the facility that housed the Manhattan Project. So when we were working on the 6888 legislation, I'll talk a little bit more about that, Congressman Higgins from Buffalo decided to have a post office renamed, and that's bipartisan legislation. So when the President Biden signed the Congressional Gold Medal Act in 2022, in October, he also signed into public law a post office rededication for Miss Indiana Hunt Martin, and she's in the iconic photo. Millie Don Veazey, another fascinating story, also from North Carolina. Returned from the war, she told a lot of stories how this family pretty much adopted her, this English family. But when she came back, she used a GI Bill and got her bachelor's degree and master's degree, became involved in civil rights. So during the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King came to North Carolina. He stayed at her sister's house. And she was the first female president of the Wake County in Raleigh of the NAACP. And recently, there was legislation signed to have a post office dedicated for her in Raleigh, North Carolina. And New Hampshire's own Doris Moore. Yeah, again, she used Portsmouth High School. Before she joined the Army, she had her bachelor's degree, and she was the first black social worker, and her niece is actually here, Miss Pettigrew. So one thing about these veterans, and not only with Liz, right? Yes. With Liz, she said, never talked about the service. A lot of veterans don't talk about the service. And that's why it's so important to ask. There are veterans in your family, ask them to share their stories, because first of all, as a veteran myself, after I wrote my book, my son said, you never talked about any of this stuff. Like, you never listened. But it's just some things you just don't talk about. Number one, you don't think people understand. And if I told someone, just a casual conversation, oh, where are you from? Where have you lived? And I told them all those places, that would be unsettling. I think academic people probably move around, as much as military people. But it's just something that veterans don't talk about. And with the 6888, what I learned is that a lot of them were told not to talk about what they were doing because mail was such a sensitive mission. Oh. And I met one of these families in 2023 when I led a tour with Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours. I'm one of their tour historians for the 6888. We went in 2023 if we get enough people, because prices are so expensive now. We'll go back in October. But this person on the tour, her grandmother's in the 6th AAA, she brought this notebook to me, and she was whispering. She says, "Is it okay if I show you something?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, what is it?" She says, "My grandma said I couldn't show this to anyone." And it was just some pictures stamped property of the U.S. government. And she said her grandmother had told her, "If you ever show these to anyone, I'll go to jail." So she didn't talk about a survey. She didn't show those photos to anyone. But on our tour, we had a really fascinating time because I wanted to retrace the 6 AAA steps. The first picture is Stratford-upon-Avon, the birthplace of Shakespeare. So at the top you see actual members of the 6 AAA, and these are members of our tour group. This is in Rouen, France, Joan of Arc Parade, and this is the King Edward School in Birmingham, England. We also went to Rouen, France. Rouen was a concentration camp, and the 6 AAA worked very closely with German prisoners when they were there, and also civilians. And Indiana Hunt Martin, the lady who worked at the Manhattan Project, in our documentary, she had a Ziploc bag just full of stuff. She says the Germans gave us a lot of junk. She had the emblems and insignia of German prisoners of war, earmuffs, spears from their boots. But she had a jewelry box. It was "To Indiana, love, Gibson." And we said, "Who's Gibson?" She said, "Oh, there's some German POW." So she became friends with German POW, as did a lot of black women, because the German POWs worked alongside a lot of black women in the U.S. as well. There's another great book called Enemies in Love by Alexis Clark about this German POW and this black nurse who ended up getting married. So it's a fascinating story. He was working in some of the encampments in the U.S., and the black women were assigned to take care of the German POWs. He saw her and says, "I'm going to marry you." And he did, so Enemies in Love. We're in Rouen, France, with a street dedication in Petit Quevely in Rouen. And Normandy American Cemetery, over 9,000 graves at Normandy American Cemetery. 4 women, 3 are from the 6 AAA, who got killed in a vehicle accident. The movie shows them getting killed in Birmingham, England by UXB, unexploded bomb. That didn't happen. They were killed in a vehicle accident. And as with wartime burials, the Army only buried all remains in mattress covers, parachutes, whatever was available. So the Army didn't do anything wrong with the 6 AAA. Charity Adams collected money to give the women a proper burial, a traditional burial. So German prisoners built the coffins. And I misunderstood that until I talked to the American Battlefields Monuments Commission to question why was it depicted like that. So he explained to me that, as with the movie and in some of the writings about the burial standards, so they were buried at St. Andre Military and then relocated to Normandy. And I have the list and the grave sites in Appendix 4 of my book, and also the grave sites of all black troops buried in Normandy. It's about 134, and 5 on the Wall of the Missing. Fort Lee now has an exhibit, if you ever get to Petersburg, Courage to Exhibit, and that's actually Kerry Washington visiting the museum with Tracy Bradford. I work with families to donate items to the museum, and it's a display, should be up for the next 2 or 3 years. I know there's some consolidation, but the museum is still there. Congressional Gold Medal. I wish I would have paid more attention in civics class about how a bill becomes a law. And the 2/3 majority of the House and Senate, bipartisan. I mean, that's the basic, you have to get co-sponsors, people sign on to say, yes, I will vote for the bill in order for it to go to vote. And the Congressional Gold Medal is the nation's highest civilian honor. Less than 200 have been awarded since General George Washington first got it in 1776. And the 688 is the only military women's unit who served with full honors to receive this award. The Women's Air Service pilots received, but they did not get veteran status, and they were actually civilian contractors. The Hello Girls, that Congressional Gold Medal is just to prove it hasn't been minted. So we had our ceremony on April 29th. It was signed in 2022. And this is a timeline. Normally when the bill is passed, the president holds a signing ceremony. Ukraine had, I think the war in Ukraine had just started when the Congressional Gold Medal passed. So Speaker Pelosi held a signing ceremony in her office. And then we had a watch party as the bill went to vote the night, a couple of days prior. And that's Senator Moran talking about the 6888 on the Senate floor. And one thing I liked about the story of the 6888, they restored reliable communications in World War II, and this legislation, I like to think it also restored Congress, because when we went to the ceremony on the 29th, it was a fabulous ceremony, bipartisan. Everyone stood up and just talked about what the 6888 did for the nation, over 300 families. This is Charity Adams' son and daughter. And that, you know, and here I am with Speaker Johnson. Only one gold medal is minted, and brass replicas, you can buy those online. So that ceremony was just held April 29th, 3 years after the legislation was passed. So when we talk about the 6888, as I mentioned early when I started talking, it's history, it's heritage, but when I assess history, I look at the impacts on today's culture. Especially with, you know, a story like this. When I was growing up, or even now, I cannot recall one movie that ever showed, first of all, women in World War II in a serious role. If there was a nurse, the nurse always fell in love with the patient. There were no black women, you know, in uniform in World War II movies, and it probably wasn't until MASH, the Korean War, that was actually based in Uijeongbu. That's where I was stationed, so I thought that was pretty cool. Where you saw women doing something operational. I mean, it was nurses, but you know, Margaret Houlihan and the other ones, they did a lot more than just nursing. It was an operational environment. So that's another reason the 6888 story just resonated with me, because I can see the impacts. It's an international impact, as you can see by the blue plaques and street renamings, not only in France, but there's street renamings all throughout the U.S. now. And Liz, you were telling me that your Aunt Doris never talked about the 6888, and not only with Doris Moore's family, these families are learning more about their family member than they ever knew. Stanley Early, Charity's son, says sometimes he feels like an imposter. He said, I was born 8 years after my mom got in the military, so I don't know this woman you were talking about. I just know mom. So I believe that families and communities are now learning and preserving this history. There's a new set of international role models. When I went to France, and I've been to Birmingham, England twice, the communities just embrace the story. And I actually see, you know, little girls dressing up like 6888, you know, members. So it's a new sense of patriotism that I think is really crucial. Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune was also General Mary McLeod Bethune. She was an honorary general in the Women's Army for National Defense. She was played by Oprah in the movie, and I'm like, why isn't she in uniform? She's a general. And also with an impact of the 6888, it's an uncovered segment of World War II history. It's still World War II history. We've just expanded the narrative, and there are so many other stories like the 6888 from women and other soldiers and service members, not just soldiers, Army, all service members. And now the 688 legacy of service is being included in World War II history. I just love seeing it. I saw the picture up there with the 688 in France, and I actually met the daughter of one of the members in that photo. She says, I never knew anything about my mom. She died when I was 1. So now she's learning about her mother's service. So that's the thing about storytelling and museums and within families. You realize that your family members, although they may not talk about their history and their service, they did some really important work. And I think it serves as a lesson to all of us, compared to World War II or even, a few decades ago, our resources. We have so many more resources to make such a contribution, and look what the greatest generation and others were able to do, with those limited resources. One known living 688 veteran, Miss Anna Mae Robertson, just died. Major Fannie McClendon has an interesting story. She retired from the Air Force, but she was a first lieutenant with the 688. When she came back from the war, she said that, first of all, she was from Louisiana, and she heard about the war on the radio. She could speak French, and so this is the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, and that's how she learned about the war on the radio when she was in France. Came back when Truman allowed women to return to the armed forces, the Women's Service Integration Act. She went to the recruiting station, and an Air Force recruiter saw her and asked her where she was going. She said, I'm going to join the Army. He says, no, you don't want to do that. So that's how she got in the Air Force. These are the stories, true story. So that's Major McClendon. She'll be 105 in October.
Oh my goodness.
All right. So what I've done, you heard about my book. I just felt the list of the black men buried in Normandy was just treasure, and I figured everybody may not like my book, but they may be interested in a derivative work from the book, so I just self-published. It's on Amazon, the list of all the troops, black service members buried in Normandy. It's about 137 or 38, including the 3 women for the 688, and I have the grave sites and just some of the stories that I was able to locate about some of those individuals. My socials, stay in touch. So subject to your questions, we have a few minutes for questions. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you.